Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now while browsing AliExpress I came across a graphics card that I've never actually tested before, and that's a rarity in itself considering the cards and the other hardware we've tested over the years on this channel. So the card in question, according to this box and at first glance, you'd think would be something from Nvidia, right? Well, despite the design, what we have in here is actually an AMD GPU. It's called the SOYO RX 560 XT. Now this isn't to be confused with the 5600 XT or the regular RX 560. This actually launched a few years ago now. It was designed to sit somewhere between the standard RX 560 and the RX 570. The thing is, it was only released in the Chinese market, and up until this point I haven't actually seen any floating around on UK sites at all, so I had to go directly through AliExpress, where I paid about £55 before tax. Now at this price it makes a lot more sense to opt for one of the RX 580s that you're going to find, even the RX 580 204 SP cards that are plentiful on this website. But I wanted to look at one of these today because A, we've never done so before, and I wanted to see how well it holds up in 1080p gaming in 2024. Now if we go on the Chinese AMD website, we can actually see some benchmarks taken by AMD back in the day, and it does put the card somewhere between the 560 and 570. Obviously AMD didn't see the need to fill the same gap in Western markets, and I'm not 100% sure why it didn't launch here, but it certainly would have been an interesting release. I'm sure some reviewers would have slated it, and others, I guess depending on the price, would have seen it as a welcome addition. Now first things first, this SOYO card looks absolutely fantastic. There isn't much inside the box. We get the card itself wrapped in a bubble wrap sleeve with extra padding in here, of course. Absolutely fine, it arrived in one piece within 5 days. We have a single 8-pin connector on here, and one thing you're going to notice as well is the lack of connectors. We only have the single HDMI output here. There's no display port here. I'm not sure if this is the same for other branded cards, but with this one we have the single HDMI output, and that's not a big deal for me as someone who uses a single monitor, but it's definitely worth noting. Now to install the drivers, of course, it isn't recognised on the AMD site. You can't just type in 560 XT and the drivers pop up, so I just installed RX 560 drivers instead. I tried to go with even later RX 6600 drivers just to see if we can install the very latest version, but the card wasn't recognised in the driver setup, so no big deal. I installed the standard 560 drivers. The card was recognised as the XT version during setup, so that went absolutely fine. What I did notice is that the fans do stop with this model under very low load, so it's completely silent if you install the drivers initially and then just leave your PC in idle mode, and even under load the fans never really span up all that fast. And despite what a couple of reviews said, I found the card to be really quiet during heavy operation. I've tested a couple of SOYO cards now, and I do appreciate the build quality of them. I think for the money you're paying you're getting a pretty good quality card for that. This is actually an 8GB GPU, so we have plenty of VRAM. The base is covered as far as memory is concerned. 8 gigs is probably what most of you are going to want to aim for as a minimum in 2024, but having said that, you could still get by with 4 gig cards. You know, the 1650 Super, for example, is still pretty decent, and the 4 gig RX 580 can still hold its own, but it is nice to see 8 gigs of GDDR5 with this one. Without further ado then, let's see how well this China exclusive GPU from 2019 performs in a few of my favourite games. Now I had to start with CS2, of course, still the most popular game according to the Steam hardware survey. I ran this with the high preset and anti-aliasing off at 1080p. We saw 120 FPS as an average, with a 1% low of 92 and a 0.1% low of 26. So a few dips and drops here and there, but overall a very consistent experience. Forza Horizon 4 has made its way back into the Steam most played list, simply because I believe it's being removed from online marketplaces in December, so get it while you can. I might make a separate video as a sort of PSA and talking about how well it runs on older and more entry level hardware. This card's actually a good example of how well this game can run. even on cheaper cards, because we were seeing 94 FPS with the high preset on average, with some pretty decent percentile lows. Elden Ring at 1080p with the medium preset and anti-aliasing set to high didn't quite hit the built-in 60 FPS cap, but we did hit 58, and the 1 and 0.1% lows were 50 and 43 respectively, so no problems whatsoever with frame dips and drops. I expected GTA 5 to do well, what with being an older game, but with the very high settings, the sliders set to max and FXAA enabled, we saw 106 FPS, the 1% low was 87, and the 0.1% low was 85, so the China exclusive 560 XT from AMD is doing very well here. I've also left the temperature, power and utilization figures on screen, and we can see that throughout the card is staying well within very reasonable temperatures, and it's using less than 100 watts of power pretty much all of the time. Starfield up next. This was a bit of a challenge for the card, of course, but it managed to scrape past 30 FPS at the lowest settings with 50% resolution scale and FSR 3 enabled. We saw 32 here in and around the busy city of Aquila. 25 FPS was that 1% low, and the 0.1% low was 19, so some problems to be expected, but playable if you use a 30 FPS cap and don't mind what looks like Vaseline smeared all over your screen. Cyberpunk 2077 with the lowest settings now. I do believe we could have stuck with the low preset for somewhere between 40 and 50 FPS. With FSR 2.1 quality enabled as well, we actually saw at least 60 with the lowest settings, 63 to be precise. The 1% low was 49 and the 0.1% low was 43, so this was also more consistent than what I was expecting. For Fortnite, we have the medium preset, 100% res scale and FXAA for an average of 80. The 1% low was 54, but as usual there were a few dips and drops in the opening game here, which resulted in our 0.1% figure being recorded as 7 FPS. Finally, it's Red Dead Redemption 2 with the Xbox One X equivalent settings as detailed by Digital Foundry. Now we have 59 here. Couldn't quite hit 60 FPS, but this was more than good enough. The 1% low was 49 and the 0.1% low was 46, so even in and around busier areas, and in pairing with my i5 12400F and 32 gigs of DDR4, we saw a pretty decent result. So this has been the SOYO RX 560 XT, the 560 XT of course being a China exclusive card, available on sites like AliExpress. You may occasionally see one pop up on ebay.com or .co.uk or on some European selling sites too if you are lucky, but AliExpress is definitely the place to go if you want one of these. Having said that, and as I said at the start, I suggest the RX 580 2048 SP instead. That's probably going to do better as it's more akin to a 570, so you should be able to squeeze a few more frames out of a card like that without paying much more. But it's been interesting to check this one out, so thank you as always, and I'll see you next time.